You are listening to the first Engage of 2025 on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. If I ask you to describe the state of American politics today, trustworthy, honest, and compassionate may not be the first words that come to mind. But those are the words Orlando resident and former Florida House Representative Dick Batchelor uses to describe President Jimmy Carter. Batchelor was a student at UCF when he first met the then Georgia governor. When Carter announced his presidential bid, Batchelor was serving in the Florida House and endorsed the Democratic candidate's campaign. It gradually gained momentum, and Carter went on to beat Republican incumbent Gerald Ford to serve as president from 1977 to 1981. Batchelor spent time at the White House during the Carter administration, where he was appointed to the White House Conference on Aging. In 2002, Carter was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for decades of work finding peaceful solutions to international conflicts, advancing democracy and human rights, and promoting economic and social development. Jimmy Carter died on Sunday at 100 years old. Funeral services begin on Saturday. We asked Dick Batchelor to join Engage to reflect on his friendship with the 39th president.
Well, fortunately, I had met with him when he was governor. I was working on 2 term papers at the University of Central Florida. And he was nice enough to accommodate a request for a meeting, and we discussed the 2 issues I was doing my term on, which I was doing my term papers. And he referred me to the right people to do my research. And then I went, wow, this is really interesting. I mean, he is the peanut farmer and governor of Georgia, and plain spoken, almost like a Harry Truman figure. So I got to know him then. And then when he announced president, and then I was in the legislature. So I was the first Democrat to endorse him, and so I was very happy to do so. I just, to answer your question very specifically, I just was very fond of how attentive he was, how available he was, and then how intentional he was in responding to questions and all. So I became a very big fan of, at the time, Governor Jimmy Carter.
Could you tell then, when he was governor, that there was higher office in his future?
You know, the rumors abounded, but it was just so early. No, I did not. I would like to be able to say that I saw him presidential timber, that he was going to run for president and be elected, but I did not see that. Maybe I was not aware of it, that he was headed that way. But no, I did not at the time recognize that he was presidential timber.
When Jimmy Carter got elected president, can you take us back? Where was America as a country when Carter came in and kind of hit the reset button in a way?
Well, fortunately, it was post-Watergate, so people were really looking for somebody who was what I would call a plain spokesperson, a straight shooter. Unfortunately, he took over at a time that inflation was at 17%, unemployment was high. We had an oil crisis, and because oil prices are going up so much, so he had a difficult time. But I think the one thing he brought to the fore was his honesty and really his human rights vision. Camp David Accords is one good example, and then the way he addressed human rights before the Congress, before United Nations, and what an important issue human rights should be around the world. And then again, at the time, he basically came in, post George Wallace, white supremacist governor of Alabama. So that was around the same time. So we were making great leaps and bounds when it comes to public policy, particularly when it came to things like race and human rights.
What is the Carter policy in office that you think captured him, the mission of Jimmy Carter?
I think it was the Camp David Accords. When he negotiated a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, they were in Washington for 11 days, in and out of negotiations, and he kept them there for 11 days until they got an agreement. So at the time, having a peace accord, the Camp David Accord was, I would say, his biggest legacy when it comes to his presidency.
You have said when talking about him, when you were talking to him, he made you feel like the only person in the room. Can you expand on that and just the charisma there?
Yeah, I can remember the very first time I met him in Orlando at the Sheraton Plaza at the airport, and we were moving around the room. And back then, fundraising is not what it is today. I mean, if you could raise $10,000, you were a hero. But it was a small fundraiser. I remember the first time since he was governor, when he became president's candidate, I actually met with him. And he was laser focused on what you were saying, and also laser focused on his response to you. It wasn't just, gibberish and passive conversation. It was very intentional conversation. So I was very impressed that he would do that.
Is there anyone else like him? You've in politics, have you met anyone since?
I would say that if you look at on the human rights issue and the race issues, there's a big aside that I would compare him to Bill Clinton, because they both came out of the South. They both came out of states that had white supremacist movements. They both moved beyond that. They were really torch carriers when it comes to human rights issues and race issues. So that would be the comparison I would make with the two gentlemen at this point.
Do you think there's a place in American politics today for a politician of Jimmy Carter's character?
I would hope so, but in all candor, I'm not confident that that's going to take place in the near future. Our country has become so divided on the far left, the far right. It's become so bombastic and toxic. So I don't know if we can get back there. I would hope that we could, but we have a long way to go in all candor.
Where do we see his legacy today in 2025?
I think his legacy, again, is, of course, he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and I think a lot of that had to do with what he did around the world, and a lot of what he did after he left office, from Habitat for Humanity to the Carter Center, sending delegations around the world to monitor elections, to make sure they were open and free elections. In fact, in most recent history, the Carter Center had a delegation of observers in Venezuela and came out and said it was not a fair and open election at all. So his legacy continues on even after his passing at 100 years old.
Just curious, did you ever meet Rosalind Carter?
Oh, yeah, very delightful. Yeah, she was a very delightful lady. Yes.
It's just remarkable that they were married for 77 years.
I know, 77 years. 77 years. It is remarkable, but he's a story. I would hope that some young people who were getting involved in politics today would really look at former President Jimmy Carter and say, you can be forthcoming, you can be honest, you can be a straight arrow, and you can survive the politics of it. And sometimes you have to take positions that are not politically popular, but they're the right thing to do. And you still can do that. Hopefully that will be something the young people can carry forward in the not too distant future.
Are there other personal memories that stand out that you would like our audience to hear?
I think serving at the White House Conference on Aging was fascinating, because I was appointed by President Carter to the White House Conference on Aging when I was 28 years old. But I had a chance not only to work with the White House and him, but also Claude Pepper, who is another well-known figure in politics in Florida, who was really the father of Social Security and Medicare and things like that. So it was a great opportunity to be in that conference on aging. But yeah, I would say just when I would go to the White House and he would make himself available, again, he was just so down to earth and so just a real straight arrow. That's the way to put it. Just a very straight arrow and a great public servant. And his style will be sorely missed. I hope we can get it back.
That was Orlando resident and former member of the Florida House of Representatives Dick Batchelor on the legacy of President Jimmy Carter. Two state lawmakers recently announced they are leaving the Democratic Party and joining the GOP. A Florida Democratic Party operative weighs in on the Dem defections and the significance of the switch. That's later on Engaged. If you miss any part of the show today, you can always subscribe to the Engaged podcast and listen whenever it's convenient for you. The program will be available on demand at cfpublic.org. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, Central Florida Public Media's One Small Step recently set up a booth to record conversations between members of the region's community, and they captured some very candid conversations.
Have political discussions strained any of your relationships?
Yes. I have a sister-in-law who thinks differently than I do, and I think it has strained our relationship with my brother-in-law, who is my husband's twin brother.
We'll hear conversational highlights from last month's One Small Step event. But first, whatever route your GPS or itinerary takes you, down Colonial Drive, on John Young Parkway, maybe along I-4, driving through Central Florida isn't known as a stress-free experience. Local law enforcement increased patrols this busy holiday week to catch and stop reckless drivers. Central Florida Public Media health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen found some potentially promising trends on the roads. He explains Florida wrapped up 2024 with a 7-year low in vehicle crashes and a 4-year low in fatalities.
Florida had a 10% decrease in total crashes between 2018 and 2024, and a 9% decrease in fatalities that same time frame. At the county level, Orange, Volusia, Lake, and Seminole counties all saw less fatalities. Migdalices Garcia is a state trooper with the Florida Highway Patrol. She says the agency is focusing more on preventative strategies, including increasing its communication with the public through social media.
You know what? We get a lot of calls about people speeding on this certain, in this certain area. Let's go over there. And then that's how, they move around through the counties.
Once FHP finds potential hotspots, they send troopers to monitor the area and cut down on the number of tragedies seen on the roadways and clearing the way for safer travels. Joe Mario Pedersen, Central Florida Public Media.
And Joe Mario Pedersen joins us now to break some of this down. Thanks for joining us, Joe Mario.
Hey, glad to be here.
Talk to me a bit about what the numbers looked like 7 years ago before the state started seeing this positive return on efforts to reduce traffic fatalities.
So they were definitely a lot higher. So 2018 is the earliest year that this publicly available data can be searched on FHP's crash dashboard, which is a pretty handy tool. And if you look back at 2018, there were 403,626 crashes in that year. Speeding up to 2024, we saw that number drop down to 362, which is about a 10% decrease. As far as fatalities go, we saw a decrease in that realm as well. In 2018, there was 3,100 crashes, and by 2024, we saw that drop down 9% to about 2,800, which is pretty great as far as these crashes are concerned, because Florida usually is pretty high as far as the states in the country with the most notable dangerous roadways.
Mm-hmm. And hearing you talk about those trends and those numbers makes me, wonder why, what's the cause? And law enforcement is crediting the public with providing information about unsafe drivers.
Partly, yeah, no, that's definitely true. So when I spoke to FHB about this, they said that this is really down to two different preventative strategies. And they've really been trying to focus more on being preventative, right, rather than reactive to receiving 911 calls about someone like speeding or driving recklessly, right? And those two different avenues that they're talking about here are more communication with law enforcement. So like surrounding agencies, we're talking about like Orange County Sheriff's Office or Orlando Police Department, and exchanging information with each other about hot spots where they're getting more calls about reckless driving, but also reaching out to the public and making themselves more available to tips on this, right? They often find that the public actively wants more policing in areas that are seeing this kind of illegal behavior, right? So making themselves available via social media, providing hotline information, but really they've seen a lot of communication back and forth on social media via Facebook.
And we're talking about reducing traffic fatalities, but I also want to highlight the fact the state overall has seen a reduction in pedestrian deaths specifically.
Yes, and I think this is really worth noting because Orlando and the Sanford and the Kissimmee area, have been noted as being the number one worst pedestrian fatality areas in the country for a lot of different years. I think the last time they were in the number one spot was in 2021. However, Orlando did get bumped down to the number 18 spot in 2022. That was according to a study. And it did say that there was some noticeable changes as far as those pedestrian deaths go in 2018 for the Orlando area. However, the reason why it dropped from 1 to 18 at that time was, they said, having more to do with other cities in Florida having more pedestrian deaths. There were 6 cities in total in that study that were noted as being in the top 20 for the deadliest cities when it comes to pedestrian deaths. However, according to the FHP data, what we're seeing here is between 2018 and 2024, we've actually seen a 14% decrease in pedestrian deaths throughout the state of Florida. And in Orange County, we've seen a 28% decrease in those pedestrian fatalities as well. So we're really starting to see, that focus on preventative strategies really start to play out here.
What is working here? What's been the most effective when we're looking at these efforts that led to this reduction?
So again, talking to FHP about this, it really is, they say that communication, getting a better idea of what the public is seeing out there. They really credited a lot to finding out about these hotspots and then, having troopers actually like hang out there and like you'll probably see troopers who are hanging out at different areas. The troopers who are doing that, who don't have like, a radar gun out, they're out there for that preventative idea, right? That if you see a trooper, you're gonna slow down, right? That whole idea of you see, you don't want to get in trouble, right? So you see that, you slow down. So they're assuming that by having that presence there, that it's going to prevent future tragedies.
Can you give an example of where this has worked?
Yeah, I can. So a recent one would have been on November 30th here in Orange County. There was several tips that FHP had received from the public about these street takeovers in which a lot of different members of the community have been getting together for street racing, which can be really dangerous for a lot of reasons. It can be dangerous for the drivers who happen to encounter these races, but also for the pedestrians who are involved. And when I say pedestrians, I mean the spectators who have come to like watch the racing, right? Things can get a little out of control. A car can barrel into an area that has people. It can be a really problematic and fatal situation. So on November 30th, they found out that there was a meetup, and they worked together with our Orlando police, and they arrived at the event as it was getting ready to go. They ended up arresting 3 people from this event, but they also issued about 154 traffic citations. 132 of those were specifically to spectators. You're actually still eligible to be cited if you were there specifically to watch the event. So the whole idea here is that they're hoping not only to discourage street racing, but also the enthusiasm around those who wanted to watch something like this. And the more that they feel like they can do this, obviously the more they feel like they can cut down on street racing and future tragic events.
Joe Mario, are there concerns that this growing population here could bring these rates back up and we head in a negative direction?
I would certainly say that is a concern. More people out on the roadways, could lead to future problems. However, this is something that they are contending with in multiple different ways. When I was talking to FHP, they also mentioned that tourism increases all the time. And with, more people moving here, with more people coming to visit here, they say that the biggest challenge that they've had in actually trying to mitigate these disasters and trying to bring these numbers down is, again, it's communication, but in a different way, in trying to communicate to visitors or people not from the area who speak other languages and aren't familiar with the rules, or again, aren't familiar with the hotspots, and trying to talk to these folks in different ways. There's been a bigger emphasis on troopers who can speak more than one language, but they've also been relying on technology that's been able to translate for a trooper who might be dealing with a visitor who speaks a language that they're unfamiliar with. So, I mean, as far as those concerns go, they're certainly there, but the whole idea is to even with a growing population or growing tourism, they think that they can still keep these numbers down by continuing to enforce preventative measures.
Central Florida Public Media's Joe Mario Pedersen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In the weeks following the 2024 general election, many Florida Democrats were flummoxed to learn that two different state representatives had left the party to join Republicans in the Tallahassee State House. Last week, Broward County Representative Hillary Cassell announced she is switching her affiliation to Republican, posting, quote, "I can no longer remain in a party that doesn't represent my values." Cassell made this announcement just a few weeks after Tampa area Representative Susan Valdez made the same switch, saying that she is, quote, "tired of being the party of protesting." Florida's legislature enjoys a Republican supermajority, and following November's election, a stronger majority after flipping 2 blue seats in the House while only losing 1. And that was before gaining Cassell and Valdez to the red side of the aisle. Steve Shale is a Democratic operative in Florida who managed Obama's 2008 campaign in the state. He joined us to parse out the political implications of these defections. He began the discussion by explaining that these kinds of party changes are not unprecedented.
I started working in politics in Florida in 1996, and that was the year that the Republicans took over the majority for the first time in the Florida House. And we saw a fair number of people switch parties in that cycle. 5 or 6 members did. And some of that was a function of members who just, they wanted to be in positions of power, and they knew that if their minority party status would make it harder for them to be that. There were also members who just kind of saw the writing on the wall demographically in their districts that, kind of old Southern white districts were getting more Republican. And so, no, I mean, we've seen it before. And I mean, I think having 2 members switch, we have not seen that for a while. But, over the last 30 years, you'll have a member here and there, and they'll switch from one way or the other.
Is it unusual to happen this close to the election results?
Well, typically it does happen this close to the election results. And, oftentimes it is a member who, either kind of realizes the district is going in a difficult direction, or, a member who sees an opportunity to go try to put themselves in a more powerful position in the legislature. And certainly, I think in the case of Representative Valdez in Tampa, who I like a lot as a person, I've heard she has some interest in running countywide in Hillsborough, and right now Hillsborough has not been trending in a very good way for Democrats. So she may have seen this as a way to put herself in a stronger place to run down the line. It's hard to say. I mean, members are and elected people are motivated by all kinds of things, but certainly it's hard. It's not impossible, but it's difficult to be an effective member of a body where you're part of a group that's less than a third of the membership. And so I think sometimes you also have members that make very sort of rational decisions that the issues they care about, they can be more effective by being on the winning side.
Susan Valdez is one of the Democratic lawmakers who switched, Hillary Cassell being the other. Would they then align with the MAGA branch of the Republican Party, or will they stay closer to the center line?
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, politics is a team sport, and over the years you see different sort of styles of speakers in the Florida House. You'll see speakers that sort of demand a lot of unanimity from their team, and you'll see speakers that will give a lot more leeway to their members. And Representative Danny Perez from Miami, who will be the Speaker of the Florida House, is, I think, so far sort of indicated a pretty open process in the legislature. So it'll be interesting to see. I suspect that there'll be issues that he will give them space to go be what they need to be. For Representative Valdez, it's a little bit different situation because she is terming out of the legislature. And so this is her last 2 years in the House. Representative Cassell would have to run for re-election in 2 years in a seat that's competitive, but it is definitely still a Democratic seat.
Help me understand, how is this justified by candidates? How do you just win under one party and then decide that you're going to be representing the other one?
Well, I mean, again, I think, folks tend to look at these things in very sort of personal ways. I mean, Representative Cassell, for example, was not on the ballot in 2024. She was reelected without opposition. Representative Valdez did defeat a Republican to get elected. I think that both of them made the decision that they could be more effective for their constituents as a Republican, and let the chips fall when they run for re-election. And we've seen this work both ways. I mean, we've seen certainly folks who switched parties who went on to have robust careers in the process. Then you see folks like Sherry McInvale, who represented the Winter Park area about 15 years ago, was elected as a Democrat, switched parties as a Republican, then just got handily defeated by Scott Randolph, who's now the tax collector down there. So we'll see how voters handle it.
Speaking of Central Florida, the Orlando area is definitely a blue liberal pocket in this state. What do you think the takeaway is for Democratic voters like them?
When you look at where Democrats are still doing well, we're doing better with sort of suburban, college-educated voters, younger voters. You have that in spades in Central Florida. When you look at where Democrats are struggling, particularly sort of Latin American, Hispanics, and voters without a college degree, you saw really sort of struggle. And so, I think that demographically, for my party to do well going forward, we have to fix the challenges in the coalition. The argument I often make to folks is the things that we're struggling with in Florida are not unique to Florida. I mean, you look around the country this year, and my party struggled with Hispanic voters, struggled with non-college voters, struggled with Black men, for example. And those are things I think we have to fix if we're going to be competitive going forward in America. And I think if we fix those things in a way that we're more competitive around the country, we'll be more competitive in Florida. And if we don't, then we got a larger problem than just Florida.
How do you fix it? How do you connect with those voters?
I think you have to get back to meeting voters where they are. I ran President Obama's campaign in Florida in 2008, and the history of Obama is a sort of charismatic, generational type figure, which he was. But Barack Obama also ran more ads in Florida on cutting taxes for the middle class than any other issue that he ran on. And it was because in that cycle, that was an issue that mattered to voters. Cost of living had been up. It was the one way government could help people by cutting their taxes. And so I think, we have to get back to meeting voters where they are. We have to do a better job of creating a broader tent so people that may not agree with us everything still feel like they have a home in our party. And we have to do a better job just in general in how we communicate with voters. I mean, you look at the Atlantic did a wonderful piece recently where, they showed that despite the fact that Harris had run a number of ads on certain types of issues, that voters thought that the number two things she cared about were sort of the rights of transgendered people. And listen, that's important. And I think my party should always stand up for the voices of marginalized voters. But that wasn't the second most important thing to her. That's a failure on my party's point to communicate with what we really wanted to do. So I view coming out of 2024 as an opportunity for us to get some things right.
What does it mean to be a Democrat in Florida in 2025?
It's hard to say. I've been a Jaguars fan most of my my adult life, and so I'm used to the struggles. I always view these things less about kind of what does it mean and more about how do you fix it. And I do think that getting back to some core basics, recruiting better candidates down the ballot, doing more to support young people who are running for office at the local level, and just getting some wins. I mean, if you go back, for example, 20 years ago, 2005, we were at, I think, 35 members of the Florida House, 12 in the state Senate, got beat by double digits, in the previous election. And the party started by winning mayors. That was when Buddy Dyer was elected, for example, elected a Democratic mayor in that cycle in Tampa, elected one in Jacksonville. And I think that you have to get back to that kind of building block, having success at the local level, and redefining what it means to be a Democrat who can win. In 2030, Florida's probably going to pick up 4 congressional seats. And so my argument I make to both sort of local donors and national donors is, even if you think Florida is sort of out of play for the presidential or the governorship for a while, there's still very important things at stake here. And winning more members of Congress helps elect a Democratic speaker, more members of the legislature help with issues we care about in Florida. And so I hope that people don't view the results and just sort of pick up their tent and run, because I think, again, getting some stuff here right in Florida is going to benefit Democrats all over the country.
Steve Schale is a Democratic operative in Florida. Talking about politics can be a sensitive subject. Coming up on Engage, hear the voices of several Central Floridians who are sharing how to do it between people with opposing views without starting a fight. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You may have heard about our Building Bridges Together One Small Step at a Time event at the Orlando Ballet in December. It was the culmination of the partnership with StoryCorps on the One Small Step project. This is where we bring together strangers with differing political views to sit down and talk about life and find some common ground. As part of that event, we set up a mini One Small Step recording booth. Hidden behind a makeshift, somewhat soundproof audio booth, we asked people at the event to sit down with a stranger and just chat for about 15 minutes. People actually took us up on the concept. Joining me now in our studio is a familiar voice to the show, Engage senior producer Richard Copeland, who manned the booth for this event. So Richard, how many people actually were willing to do this?
We had 4 conversations in total, so 8 people altogether. And there were a few people who wanted to get in and record a conversation, but we simply ran out of time before the panel discussion started. And we have to begin by saying thanks to University of Central Florida Professor Blake Scott. He worked the room recruiting people to come in and sit down for these conversations. And these conversations were actually guided by UCF student Kushi Patel, who helped explain the process to people and ask the follow-up questions.
Okay, so this is a really fascinating idea. Tell me more about how this works. Sitting down with a stranger to talk politics sounds a little intimidating these days.
You know, as it started, you could sort of see that look of intimidation on the faces of the participants, but once they got talking, they got very comfortable. The process was pretty simple. When people sat down, we had them introduce themselves, tell us why they came to the event, and then we had a handful of questions for them to choose from to go a little deeper. Questions like, tell me about a time that a belief of yours changed, or have political discussions strained relationships with friends or family. And finally, to close out, we asked people what their hopes were for Central Florida's future.
Okay, so let's listen to some of these mini One Small Step conversations.
Can both of you please introduce yourselves to the key crowd in front of you?
Gabrielle Milch.
Donna Moss, what made you come today?
I heard about it on the radio, and my life has been taking me towards, I really feel like we need to talk more with each other and get to know each other better and not be so divisive.
So for me, a friend actually let me know about it, and I have heard some of the people talk and so forth, some of it on radio, and I'm the same way. I feel like we need to start talking and that people need to be open-minded to everybody's ideas.
Have political discussions strained any of your relationships?
Yes, I have a sister-in-law who thinks differently than I do, and I think it has strained our relationship with my brother-in-law, who is my husband's twin brother.
I think that I've had similar experiences with close friends, and it's really hard because your family and your brother and his twin brother and the relationships and everything, and that's one of my big values is family. And if you can't talk to people in your family without dysfunction, then it's really difficult to talk to people who are making decisions about our lives.
Yeah.
I hope that we can overcome and be better stewards of our world and of our hearts, because sometimes you just can't take back what someone says to someone without causing schisms in their relationships.
Well, and that's why we're here today, right? Is to begin trusting people and beginning to be able to open our minds and listen to each other.
Okay. So Donna, we've gotten to know each other a little bit, and I feel comfortable with you. I think I've made a new friend. And what are your hopes for Central Florida's future?
That's a hard one for me. I'm just hoping, I see so many different cultures down here and people from all over, and I'm kind of hoping that Central Florida can be able to build more of a community of all people from different countries and different areas. The languages to me are so cool. You just, not English, there's just so many different languages, and I would like to see Central Florida just make more diversity for people to be able to teach about their different, where they come from, and teach the languages to our children, but also to everybody. So how about you?
I think my hope for the future is that that we leave the earth, it's pretty messed up, but we can leave the earth a little better, and the future generations will be able to go out and see things like bald eagles or flamingos or different things, but also that we all can kind of get along better and not get into this position again in another 100 years when when our polar shift has happened, and politically, we all have commonalities, and how we bring each other together and treat each other, because I think there's been just so much verbal abuse and sometimes not truth. So I'm down the rabbit hole, but I do hope that it gets better.
So my name is Jeremiah.
I'm Deborah, and I'm 74 years old. Tell me about a time when a belief changed. Okay, my belief changed when I first got married, and that was back in the 60s. So my husband was old-fashioned. He thought you should stay at home, just have the babies and do and be what he wanted. So as I saw that in reading the Bible and seeing what's in the Bible it don't say beat up your wife. So I said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Something's got to change. My belief changed it. Wait a minute, I must be able to do what my husband can do in order to take care of me also.
Wow, very powerful. You referenced the Bible.
Yes.
Are you a Christian?
I don't know. People ask me that, and I really need their definition of Christian.
All right, okay, fair point.
Before I can say, am I this or am I that?
Fair.
What I am is a human being.
Period.
They ask me if I'm black, white, Hispanic, this and that, and I'm looking at all of that, and I said, no, I'm just human. That don't seem to fit me. So it's
I appreciate that viewpoint.
Yes.
I acknowledge it. I accept it. I love it. I feel the exact same way. I feel like my identity always is surrounded by my sexuality and not who I am.
Right.
And so I appreciate that. Growing up and being told that I'm not a man, I'm a gay man, right? It's kind of like, oh, okay. So, I kind of like just had to accept that that's all I'd ever be considered. But I appreciate that because although I may be classified socially as a gay man, I am human, and I love that.
What is your hopes for Central Florida's future?
I honestly just want to be able to see everyone be as a melting pot as the whole country is, but accepting the melting pot.
And uplifting.
Rejoicing in the melting pot, uplifting the melting pot. I want to be able to walk on the street and not be afraid of what might happen to me, what may happen to my friends.
And me as a woman, too. I want the same thing.
So I want prosperity in terms of what it means to live the human experience, accepting that we're emotional beings, being compassionate and loving.
Yes.
And that's what I hope that for Central Florida as much as I do for the whole world.
Me too. If there's no place else, we'd like this area to at least get it right.
Hi, my name is Judith Rubinger.
And I'm Steve Saker. Was there a moment in your life which changed your beliefs or shaped your beliefs?
I came from up north. I grew up north. And in the theater world, I'm sorry to say I had a very snooty opinion about what I'm going to encounter down here in terms of culture or theater. And we went to see that performance at Lake Eola, you know, the Macbeth play. It blew me away. So that was like, whoa. You know, here I am just thinking, what do they have here? And so stuck up about it. And that was a moment that really, you know, changed the way I started thinking.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
How about the one, have political discussions strained any of your relationships?
Simple answer, yes.
Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, sure. So this goes back about 15 years, actually, way before our current interesting political environment. And we were on a cruise in the Eastern Mediterranean, kind of a high-end cruise, which I could afford at the time, but I can't afford it anymore. And we were with two other couples who were all good friends. And two of us were, or two couples were of, what we say, a liberal disposition, and one couple was of a more conservative disposition. And I made a cheap, nasty, snarky remark about the person who would be nominated to be vice president at that time, who never made it. Don't need to mention her name, but it's obvious who she was. And that created a rift which exists to this day. And my responsibility, because I didn't have to do that, it was a cheap jab. But yeah, so that.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah. What are your hopes for Central Florida's future? Despite my accent, I've been here a long time. I've been here for, it'll be 40 years next year. And before that, we lived in South Florida for a while. My wife is from Boston. And I was educated in Britain, as it's probably obvious, but I wasn't born there. I was born in Pakistan. I hope that Central Florida continues to develop, and I hope it has something for everybody. And to your world, I hope that the culture gets broader and deeper and richer. I've been pleasantly surprised by the world of theatre too, although I know nothing about your world, but we've thoroughly enjoyed many shows we've seen at the Orlando Shakes over the years.
Can both of you please introduce yourself to the key crowd in front of you?
Kaylin Lanaha.
Karen Weatherford. I was in college doing a summer job.
Okay.
I was a lifeguard and a swim teacher at a camp for kids who had emotional differences, and challenges.
Gotcha.
And there was a little boy, 6 years old, and he wouldn't put his head under the water, and he finally, I had to bribe him to blow bubbles. And the bribe was, I'm going to take you for ice cream. He was a different race than I was. He was black, and I went to pick him up, and I noticed he was not himself. And he just started freezing up. And finally he said, I asked him what was wrong. He said, they're going to think you're my mother. We went down the little mall at the little town we were in that I had grown up in also, and the comments that he got and that I got were so disgraceful and so hurtful, and not even subtle. And he looked at me like, I told you so. And I thought, I am the ignorant one, and this 6-year-old boy has learned a lesson in life that I hadn't learned.
Wow.
And it broke my heart.
I was in the closet for a long time. I grew up in a very religious family, and I was really struggling with my religion and also just the relationships and the dynamics that comes with going to college, wanting to be who you are, and then also still having that baggage of how you grew up. And one big moment was in June, my friend and I were invited to go to Pulse. That was my first queer space, that was my first gay club, and my family ended up surprising us and coming here and inviting us out. The night that he invited me was the night that we would have went to when the tragedy happened.
Oh, I was afraid you were going to.
And so,
sorry.
That moment, though, although there's so much brokenness that happened after that, I think seeing so many of my peers inspired to be themselves afterwards, I think it showed me and it gave me the push to be myself even more because I saw how fragile life can be and how much I wanted to make sure that I had the courage to do that, when that was taken away from people.
Thank you for sharing that. And how is it now for you to share that with me here now?
I do think I feel empowered in the sense that I can look back on it as I'm married to my husband now. And I feel so much more at ease with myself and who I am and who I say I can be.
Thank you.
I have chills right now just because I value this moment a lot because, man, this moment would not happen any other time. So thank you, Karen.
So thank you. And let's meet afterwards and we'll trade numbers. We're not sharing that on there. Okay.
Those were the mini One Small Step conversations recorded at our Building Bridges Together One Small Step at a Time event. We would like to acknowledge Dr. Blake Scott from UCF for helping organize the participants, and UCF student Kushi Patel for guiding the conversations, as well as the 8 Central Florida residents who sat down for a conversation. And of course, thank you to Engage producer Richard Copeland.
Always a pleasure.
We want to bring you more and new Central Florida voices on this show in the new year. Engage with us. Let us know what you want to talk about or what you're glad you heard. Send us an email to engage@cfpublic.org, or you can send us a talkback on the free Central Florida Public Media app. Thank you for joining us. Engage is back on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. I'm Sharon Stone. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.